very famous talk show host in America, a comedian, once said, you never want to follow a child act or an animal act, or Dan Mitchell. When you think of taxpayer abuse, what is it that comes to mind? What first comes to mind to me are those medieval torture devices that I saw at the fortress yesterday, or perhaps even a scene like this from the time of the pharaohs. This is a picture that I took right outside the pyramids of Giza in one of the ruins, and this is the tax collectors, the pharaoh's tax collectors, extracting the last shekels from these poor workers that were building the pyramids. That's sort of the physical aspect of tax abuse that I think most of us think about. But I think that there's a different type of tax abuse. It's more subtle. It's the impact that taxes have on our liberty and free markets. Taxes shape our lives, our choices, our professions, where we live, the products we buy, and the foods that we eat. And there are all kinds of cases like this, unintended or unforeseen consequences. And politicians, of course, like to use taxes in order to shape our lives. There are these things called Pigovian taxes, after the English economist Albert Arthur Pijou, who wanted to use taxes to stop us from harming others through things like smog or pollution or smoking or that sort of thing. And then we have these things called Sumerian taxes. That's my new term, after the Harvard economist Larry Summers, who wants to use taxes to keep you from harming yourself. Things like soda taxes and sweets taxes and things like that. So how do we fight taxes and tax abuse? Well, we could put on a yellow vest and go storming down to the Champs-Élysées. We could storm the barracks or the barricades there in Barcelona. We could move to Switzerland, perhaps even, or move to Hong Kong, where they have low taxes. Or we could use stories and humor to fight tax abuse by showing the absurdly stupid ways that taxes harm liberty and the free market. And it starts with simple things like the choices of our sweets. Now, what's the difference between these two products? They're both sweet. They're both candy. Well, one of these is taxed and one is taxed and the other isn't. Most countries and most states in the United States zero rate taxes on food. Twix bars are considered food because they have flour in them in that little cookie. So they are zero rated, whereas the other thing is taxed because it is considered candy. Now, how about children's clothing, which is zero rated in the UK? So this reporter, she's a reporter for The Guardian, I think, went out to see if she could save money, both on value-added taxes but also on clothing, by shopping for teen clothing. So here on the left is the adult clothing, which cost her a couple of €100. But then she saved €100 by shopping for teen clothing because the clothing is zero rated up to like age 16. She happens to be rather petite, so she fit into her teenager's clothes, saved both on the euro and on her clothing. Now, what about these cars? Both are luxury vehicles. One is taxed. One gets a tax subsidy because it's an electric car. The Tesla. Elon Musk is making billions of dollars by selling us these things at taxpayer subsidies. Meanwhile, if you go out and buy a fine-made German Mercedes-Benz, you pay full freight. What about this ridiculous car? This is my favorite. Where's John? Oh, Connell's not here. I was going to say, does this look like a motorcycle? No, it's the Reliant Robin, which in England back in the day, motorcycles were taxed at a different rate than four-wheeled automobiles. So this very clever company came up with this tricycle-looking automobile, and thus working-class people, especially in the north and the mining areas, bought these. They were very economical because you paid a lower tax. Now they had this little problem, which occasionally they kind of fell over. But that can happen to anybody. Now, entire cultures have been changed because of tax policy. How many people were in Copenhagen last year for the Atlas event? Notice how many people are riding bicycles throughout Copenhagen. Very environmentally friendly, don't you think? Well, they've been taxed off the roads because of the high taxes on automobiles. Millions of people in Denmark ride bicycles everywhere because they can't afford cars. The only way you can afford a car is to move over with Susanna and Anders over in Sweden, where you buy a car and then commute into Copenhagen. Now, what about the things that we live in, the places we live in? Now, taxes have an impact on that as well, often to the good, because we have very clever architects. And so in Charleston, South Carolina, where they taxed you on the number of windows you had facing the street, people put the windows on the side of the house, along with their porch, and they had this beautiful design. It's a lovely place.
Like mezzanine.
Yeah, Paris, France. How many of us have been there? You notice those beautiful roofs on the top of all the buildings? Those are mansard roofs. Those came into existence because a very clever architect named Mansard designed these to avoid the high taxes on the number of floors that you had below the roof line. And so he put this rather sloped roof on the top of the building to make essentially the attic into a tax-free living space. Then over on the far right-hand side is Amsterdam, in which you were taxed on the frontage that you had to your canals. And so what did the architects do? They built it up and narrow and all the way back. Now, they're a little cramped, but very architecturally appealing. Now, how many of you now sometimes taxes have a bad effect on architecture as well. How many of you have seen these kind of buildings? If you've traveled over through Greece or Yugoslavia, I was just in Egypt this year, and you see rebar sticking out of the top of houses. Ridiculous, right? Well, this is all because of taxes in large part, because it looks like an unfinished building, in which pay either zero or less of a tax than a finished building. And so people leave it like this and they pay lower property taxes. Or you have a situation like this. What's the difference there if you can see it? The bricks are different size. Why? Because England once put in place a tax on the size of bricks. What did brick makers do? Build bigger bricks. And so you can actually date buildings in their age by the size of the bricks. How about on the right-hand side, where you've got all the, speaking of bricks, I don't know what size they are, but you have windows that have been bricked in. Again, window taxes. We see those kind of effects all over the globe. The chicken tax. Once upon a time, during the 1960s, you Europeans put a high tariff on imported chickens from America. So what did America do? They responded by putting a tariff on delivery vans, specifically targeting Volkswagen, I think, and their delivery vans. Well, on the right-hand side, you see a Ford delivery van, which is made currently in Spain. Imported to the United States with fake seats in the back.
Yes, that is something.
It gets off the boat. They put it into a warehouse. Guys strip out the seats, put in new carpeting, finish off all the windows, and voila, you have a delivery van and not a passenger vehicle. Passenger vehicles have a tariff of 2.5%. This would have had a tariff of 25% had it been declared a actual delivery vehicle. Actually, it's really funny because the U.S. government is now suing Ford over this kind of design. They want their taxes. And of course, speaking of environmental taxes, we have big tax subsidies for things like windmills, which are otherwise unaffordable. I know we're getting there. And then we've got tariffs. Speaking of tariffs,
10 minutes for discussion.
Oh, I know. Okay, two more slides. We got tariffs, which are driving Harley Davidson to come to Europe and create jobs. You want to make $4 million quick? Smuggle cigarettes. These fine young gentlemen were were arrested taking smuggled cigarettes into New York City, where they could have made $4 million. I am always embarrassed to kind of go into the Picasso Museum in Paris. I love Picasso, but that was created because of tax policy. After Picasso died, the family was facing millions of euros worth of higher taxes through the estate tax bill, and so the finance minister in France declared that a tax obligation could be settled by the gift of artwork to the state. Thus, the creation of the Picasso Museum. You say, what does this have all to do with the kind of policies we're dealing with today? Well, these all teach us, say we can apply all of these lessons to the EU digital tax. It'll have unintended consequences. It'll harm consumers. It'll harm innovation, and so forth. All of the lessons of history and taxation give us a way of analyzing current tax policy, and I think give us humorous ways of showing politicians the error of their ways. The unfortunate thing at the end here that I think is sadly true, politicians will never be held accountable for these effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.